Cinderella is one of the most brilliant ballet scores of all time. I rate it musically above Romeo and Juliet. Cinderella is the second major story ballet by Prokofiev, Russian composer. So Romeo and Juliet was the first big story ballet he'd written. Prokofiev had fled communist Russia. He wasn't particularly interested in politics, but he had established himself in the West and spent with the Ballet Russe and other many great companies a lot of his working life in the 1920s, early 30s in Paris, in London. He travelled to the USA, gathering a whole lot of sort of musical influence, but he felt himself, as Stravinsky had, as really profoundly a Russian composer, and he decided to return to Russia in the mid-1930s. Cinderella was written at the start of the Second World War. The composition of Cinderella was interrupted by the Germans' invasion of Russia, and he didn't resume work on it really for another 4 or 5 years. For Russia, you had the siege of Leningrad, starving populations. It was a really, really dark time. By the time he came back to composing Cinderella, emotionally and mentally, he and many artists and the Russian population were in a very different state to when he'd first started and first received the commission. The third really big influence on how this score sounds on the music, if you think what happened during the Russian Revolution, what did they do? Well, they got rid of the monarchy. You couldn't present in communist Russia anything that idealised a monarchy or the old monarchy in any way at all. So they had to take a different approach, even had they not wanted to. And why all this backstory is important is because many of the Western versions of the ballet of Cinderella completely misunderstood the music because the music is quite dark and it is quite ironic. And it actually, what it wanted to show was that both Cinderella in the world that she's in and the prince in his world are misfits. Neither of them are happy in the world in which they are in, and she is not made happy by going to and falling in love with the prince because he's a prince, and he wants to escape his world as well. And the royal court, the music for the royal court is not beautiful lyrical waltzes, it's really a acerbic send-up of formal court dances with real bumps and angularity and things that you wouldn't expect in a kind of Disney version of a Cinderella world. If you think of the music for Disney films, it's all sweet and beautiful and everything's lovely at the royal court. And a lot of the seminal Western versions using Prokofiev's music really misuse the music and are almost kind of pantomime comedies, but have this happily ever after because she goes to court and finds her prince. It was all based on the idea that mankind and womankind, we are at our best when we return to nature. So the civilised world, being overly civilised and everything that goes with that, actually tends to bring out the worst in us, and we are best as human nature when we return back to from whence we came. And musically, the high points of all of that, where the music becomes simple major keys, simple rhythms, beautiful colours, out in the natural world. And the moments you feel even sort of subliminally sort of happiest are at those points where they head away from society, both as misfits. Musically, a lot of the betrayal of the ugly sisters and the stepmom, brilliant comedic writing, really acerbic writing, brilliant use of instruments. So you'll hear rattling tambourines as the stepmother sort of hisses at Cinderella and orders her around. You'll hear kind of oboes or bassoons or a contrabassoon, the lowest of bassoons, or double basses playing the melody when they're trying to learn to dance. So, double bass or contrabassoons are used for instruments like elephants or hippos or, anything that's kind of grotesque. So as they're trying to be beautiful dancing on stage, the ugly step sisters and things, you've got this grotesque instruments playing melodies underneath, but he uses instruments to great effect. And likewise, there are courtly dancers, but they are send up of courtly dancers. Their accents are on the wrong rhythm. So in one of the first of the dances where it's just in 4/4, and you'd expect the main pulses to be 1, 2, 3, 4, which is where you would step on the 1 and gesture on the 3. You'll get a 1, 2, 3, 4, which suggests that they're stumbling and falling over each other. So these people pretending to be elegant and not elegant at all. And you'll get a bass drum hit or a snare drum hit at moments where it sounds like the music is really elegant, but it's to suggest that they are not at all. The genius of the version that Ramansky worked on, and I had the privilege of working on it with him in this production of the Australian Ballet a few years ago, is that he spent years with the score really getting to understand what it was that Prokofiev was trying to do and say. Every step that he created, and likewise Jerome, the designer, spent a lot of time with the score. Every drawing that he drew was with a full understanding of that which the music is depicting and what the intent of the artistic team was. And I think some audiences were disappointed because traditionally they come along Cinderella and it is all about, the princess meeting the prince and the happily ever after. And they didn't like the kind of quirkiness. What I love about our production is it gets inside the music, and every step, Alexei in the studio working every step, he would say, listen to the music, listen to not only the rhythm of the music and the flow, but the dynamics of the music. He'd talk a lot about dynamic movement. So it's not just about a step, it's going from fast to slow, just as the music does, and really mirroring instruments or a rhythm or a twist in a melody, mirroring that in the choreography and in the execution of the choreography. So of the ballets that we have in our repertoire, it's one of the most closely knit choreographies and designs to the score that I have ever come across, and I think is an absolute work of genius.